Attorney General, the Honorable Faris Al-Rawi, as well as Minister Stuart Young, and I will pass over to Minister Young right now.
Good afternoon, members of the media, listening public. Thank you as usual for joining us. We apologize for being a little later than usual this afternoon. Cabinet has just finished its deliberations and we should have Minister of Finance joining us shortly. And thereafter, we may have the Prime Minister joining us as well. So to kick off this afternoon's proceedings, I'd ask the Honorable Attorney General to just address us on a decision that has been given by the High Court not too long ago.
Good afternoon, everyone. It may be in the public domain that the Honorable Mr. Justice Peter Rajkumar delivered his judgment today in the case of Haridath Maraj versus the Attorney General. That claim was a claim brought essentially by the opposition, challenging the selection process for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police and a Deputy Commissioner of Police. I'm pleased to say that the learned judge certainly considered the breadth of arguments before him and delivered a judgment today which addressed the mischief in Trinidad and Tobago. And permit me to state that mischief first. As you will recall, there was a very complicated process for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police. We as an opposition prior to coming into government had undertaken to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that we would amend the process of selection. We found it wholly unacceptable that the process could have taken as long as it did and be as complicated as it was and be as expensive as it was. No doubt you will recall that post the departure of Mrs. Gibbs and Uwatsky, Trinidad and Tobago saw no appointment of a Commissioner of Police. We have only had, since the period then to now, an acting Commissioner of Police. And that extension goes from 6 months to 6 months. We are of the firm view that crime being a very important, if not number one issue in Trinidad and Tobago, and the battle against crime, that it is unacceptable to have an acting Commissioner of Police. The Commissioner of Police, the office of the Commissioner of Police needs to be solidified, it needs to be certain, because the management of the police service in Trinidad and Tobago, the number one entity charged with engaging in the battle against crime, has to have some permanent head to marshal his or her troops in the drive against crime, criminality, and corruption. It is against that background that as an opposition, we called upon then government to simplify the process. That process involved following the 2009 orders for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police. That process, that order, was a very convoluted order which essentially required the DPA, the Director of Personnel Administration, to trigger the process for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police. It then set out in very long prescriptive terms, detailed terms, what you should receive, what you can't receive, what kind of process, how many advertisements, how many times, etc. Very long process. And it saw Trinidad and Tobago, because of the prescriptions in that order, acquiring the services of a foreign entity. Penn State University was the actual entity, which cost us millions of dollars and many years later to achieve absolutely nothing. Coming into office, as you will know, we sought to simplify the process by bringing forward a new order for the selection process for Commissioner of Police. And very importantly, we said that it was inappropriate to have the trigger in the Director of Personnel Administration because there was no guarantee, as we saw, that the process would actually launch. We're pleased to say that the amendments we brought to Parliament saw us replacing the DPA, the Director of Personnel Administration, with the Police Service Commission. Specifically, we then cut out of the selection process all of the long-winded process, which included how you should advertise for vacancies, the form of the advertisement, how each advertisement was to be sent back or not sent back. We took out all of the restrictions, very importantly, that one person serving on the assessment panel shall be of a higher rank or equivalent rank to the candidate. It was that process that caused us to go abroad. And we said to Trinidad and Tobago, simplify this process, take out all of the thick prescription, let the commission itself do it. But we introduced the fact that the minister shall trigger the process. To the commission, we specifically removed the DPA. I'm very pleased to say that the learned judge effectively delivered a judgment today, which I've only just received and which I'm taking advice on, but that judgment preserves the use of the Police Service Commission itself triggering the process for appointment. That judgment also preserves the fact that we don't need to set out in any great detail all of the prescriptive elements as to how this process must go every step of the way, which piece of paper, what type of paper, what type of advertisement. All of that has been removed and has been upheld by the court. And specifically, the judgment delivered today has not struck down the order in its simplified term. With that said, however, the judgment today did find that certain aspects of the order should be removed. And the judge removed, saying that it was beyond the constitutional remit of the order, that it was ultra vires. The judge removed the statement that the request of the Minister of National Security should trigger, but the judge specifically kept that the Police Service Commission should do the job as opposed to the Director of Personnel Administration. And then the learned judge did two further things which essentially were not the subject of complaint in Parliament. The judge specifically removed the use of the exception to the Central Tenders Board Act, and the judge removed the shortlisting of candidates by the firm. Those two things, the use of the exception to the Central Tenders Board Act and the shortlisting of candidates, were exact replicas from every order from 2006 come forward. So if you go back to all of the orders, ending with the most recent prior to change, which was the 2009 order, you will see the exception to the Central Tenders Board Act was there, and you will see that the listing of a shortlist by the firm was there. Indeed, the opposition made no complaint about that, as I recall, in the Parliament, but the learned judge, in his judgment today, sought to strike those parts out, and certainly I find no discomfort in that, because we're no longer dependent upon the DPA to trigger the process. We only need to rely upon the Police Service Commission to actually engage in the process. And if one looks into the schedule of the Central Tenders Board Act, you will note that the Police Service Commission is not bound in that schedule to follow the Central Tenders Board Act. This is so far the advice from the attorneys who have reported to me and have dealt with this matter. So, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to inform that nothing has disturbed the current process for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police. Secondly, I'm able to report that the process for the appointment of a Commissioner of Police is well afoot, that the Cabinet indeed approved the necessary funding for the retention of an appropriate firm. Very importantly, the order stands in very material parts. Specifically, the order allows for the Police Service Commission to march the process forward, not the Director of Public Administration, Personnel Administration. Secondly, the order which says that we can use a local firm stands, and we're no longer bound to use foreign firms, etc. Thirdly, the simplicity of the order stands, and we're very pleased to receive this so far. With that said, there is one caveat, and that is, with this judgment having just been emailed to me, I have requested senior counsel that is advising on this matter to give me the fulsome advice on the judgment so that we can consider whether there is any aspect that we may wish to treat with further, and certainly I will keep you updated to that process. We in the government are resolute that it was a proper thing to simplify the process for the appointment of a commissioner of police. We are resolute that it is appropriate that the police service be led by a confirmed and permanent commissioner of police, so that the management which is given to the commissioner of police under the Constitution can be exercised with certainty and authority, with that officer, that office holder, having the security of tenure which the Constitution intended him or her to have. I will indicate that we can take comments or questions in relation to this matter if you're interested, unless Minister Young wishes to report on any further matter that we've discussed so far, and perhaps we can take comments or questions together as a group.
Thank you, Attorney General. The Minister of Finance is joining us now, and the Minister of Finance will be addressing you all on a particular issue that has arisen.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to deal with two matters. Firstly is some issues relating to funding for the Ministry of Health. I'm doing so in the absence of the Minister of Health. And I just want to confirm what has transpired. There has been an issue with respect to funding for pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical items required for the public health sector for some time now. There was a significant overhang from the previous administration into the new administration in terms of bills due and payable at the end of August 2015. So the Ministry of Health initially had to clear off the outstanding amounts before it could get itself into funds to make new orders and procure new pharmaceuticals and medical supplies for the public health sector. We have recognized that it was necessary to provide additional funding to the Ministry of Health. The procedure I am using, rather than having to go back to Parliament to have a variation of appropriation or a supplementary appropriation bill, we are using a procedure which relies upon the use of something called treasury deposits, which are available to us. And when we close the accounts for fiscal 2016, any savings from ministries' allocations will be used to replenish these treasury deposits. This is something that has been, it's a mechanism that is used to deal with emergencies and has been used for the last 30 or 40 years, so there's nothing new about that. And we decided that it was necessary to do this, so we have made funding available to the Ministry of Health in the sum of $245 million, and it would be for the procurement of pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical items for the public health sector institutions, for antiretroviral therapy, for the Chronic Disease and Assistance Program, also known as CDAP, the National Organ Transplant Program, and the Blood Glucose Monitoring Program. This amount of $245 million will allow the ministry to clear all of its bills with NIPDEC. It will allow current invoices, which would involve orders to the various suppliers of pharmaceuticals and medication, to be settled. It will allow the ministry to issue new purchase orders, and it gives the ministry sufficient funds for the balance of the year, so that the problems that are being experienced at this time with respect to the unavailability of certain drugs and certain medication should be resolved very quickly. As the line minister for NIBNEC, even though this is a health matter, because of the fact that we're using treasury deposits and because of the fact that there are protocols in the public service with respect to the approval of funding, with respect to confirmation of a cabinet minute, then you have to identify a source of funds, then you have to confirm availability of funds, then you have to provide a release, then you have to provide a credit. I decided this would all take far too long. So as the minister with responsibility for NIBNEC, I called NIBNEC yesterday and I authorized them to place orders immediately. They tell me the invoices won't come in for about a month, which gives me more than enough time to make the money available to them. And this should deal with the current problem with respect to the unavailability of certain drugs in the health sector. Is it questions at the end? Or you take questions at the end? Or? Yeah, no problem. The other matter I'd like to report on is a matter relating to the National Lotteries Control Board. We have had a situation where the new board of the National Lotteries Control have reported that there appears to be, on the face of it, a prima facie case that there may be a conflict of interest at the National Lotteries Control Board with respect to some of the senior managers in that organization. Now, of course, this is simply at the stage of an allegation. Nobody has been found guilty. Nobody has been found guilty of anything. But it has been well ventilated in the newspapers. I think the Express has been running a series on it with respect to apparent conflict of interest with respect to the persons who were approving requests for donations from the National Lotteries Control Board and the beneficiaries and the recipients of these donations. And as I said, quite a lot of information has already been presented in the public domain. The board of the National Lotteries thought it necessary to write to the Statutory Authorities Service Commission and ask that action be taken with respect to the persons involved. And that action would be either administrative leave or some similar action that will allow the Board of National Lotteries to do an in-depth audit of its accounts going back for the last several years to see whether any of the allegations were in fact supported by evidence. So that the National Lotteries Control Board wrote to the Statutory Authorities Service Commission and sought the intervention of the Commission, because National Lotteries is one of these few remaining organizations that the staff of that organization is subject to the Statutory Authority Service Commission as opposed to the Public Service Commission. The board itself cannot take disciplinary action against the staff at National Lotteries. It has to be taken by the Statutory Authority Service Commission, so that the board, in accordance with proper procedure, wrote to the statutory authorities, the chairman of the Statutory Authority Service Commission, enclosed all the supporting documentation, which presented a prima facie case of a possible conflict of interest between senior staff at the National Lotteries and beneficiaries of donations from the National Lotteries. And they asked that the Statutory Authority Service Commission send the persons on leave or some other similar action so that a proper forensic audit could be undertaken. I regret to announce that, notwithstanding the fact that this was done over a month ago, the Statutory Authority Service Commission has not acted on the information provided to it, so that the two persons who were identified as being involved in a possible conflict of interest are still there. To compound the error, or not the error, to compound the issue, the Prime Minister had requested me, as Minister of Finance, to send the Central Audit Committee of the Ministry of Finance. Those are the people who had done the live sport audit, and it's a specialized unit in the Ministry of Finance that does special audits of state enterprises and statutory authorities and government departments whenever serious irregularities are identified. So the Prime Minister had asked me as the Minister of Finance to audit the National Lotteries Control Board. So I engaged the Central Audit Committee of the Ministry of Finance, and I have sent them into National Lotteries to do an audit. I, however, have received information that the audit is going to be difficult because the persons who they are auditing are still there. Now, this is not standard practice. When you are auditing an organization and serious allegations of impropriety and potential fraud have been made against particular individuals, the standard practice is that the persons are sent on administrative leave with pay while the audit takes place, so that there will be no interference in the audit. Unfortunately, because the staff at the National Lotteries are subject to the Statutory Authority Service Commission, notwithstanding the fact that the board has written to the Statutory Authorities Commission, notwithstanding the fact that this has been well ventilated in the public domain with a lot of information outside there, the Statutory Authority Service Commission has chosen not to send the persons on leave. So we now have a highly irregular situation where an audit is taking place and the persons who are being audited are there and can potentially interfere with the investigation. And it's out of the government's control because the Statutory Authority Service Commission is an independent body appointed by the President. We don't control the membership of that organization, nor can we compel them to discipline anyone. The representatives of the government or the members of the board can only write and say, this is the evidence, this is an apparent conflict of interest, we need to investigate this, we're talking about very large sums of money, we would like you to send these people on leave. And if the Statutory Authorities Commission decides that it does not wish to do so, there's very little the government can do except to act on a decision that was made many, many years ago, that the Statutory Authorities Service Commission Act should be repealed, the commission should be abolished, and that all of its functions should be taken over by the Public Service Commission. It was found many, many years ago that there was no need for the Statutory Authorities Service Commission, that all of its functions could be easily performed by the Public Service Commission. So we now intend to act on that decision of many, many moons ago and move to repeal the Statutory Authority Services Commission Act and allow the Public Service Commission to deal with matters of this nature.
Thank you very much. I have been asked to announce to you all today the details surrounding the official visit of the Prime Minister to Jamaica, which will take place from this Sunday, the 17th of July, to next Thursday, the 21st of July. The Prime Minister of Jamaica had extended an invitation to our Prime Minister to join him on an official state visit in Jamaica, and that is what is about to take place. The Office of the Prime Minister in Jamaica has indicated that the government of Jamaica will cover the cost of accommodation for the Prime Minister and two government ministers. On the proposal for discussions are the deepening of bilateral relationships between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in the areas of trade and economic cooperation, tourism, immigration and consular matters, energy matters, technical and cultural cooperation, and cooperation on security matters. There will also be discussions on the strengthening of Caribbean institutions via the revitalization of CARICOM and the Association of Caribbean States. We also plan to discuss the expansion of cooperation in international affairs via sustainable development issues, the implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty, and the matters related to transnational organized crime. The official delegation for Trinidad and Tobago will be led by Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, who would be the head of the delegation as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Accompanying him would be Mrs. Sharon Rowley, his spouse, Senator the Honorable Dennis Moses, Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs and Minister in the Ministry of National Security, will also be accompanying the Prime Minister. I will be accompanying the Prime Minister as well. Mr. Prakash Ramada, a Member of Parliament from the opposition, will be accompanying us, and the Honourable Orville London, Chief Secretary and Secretary of Planning, Public Administration, Information, State Lands and Energy Matters from the Tobago House of Assembly, and his wife, Ms. Bridget London, would be accompanying us on this official delegation. One of the unique items, as you would have noticed from the composition of this team and delegation that has been chosen by the Prime Minister to represent Trinidad and Tobago in Jamaica, is the inclusion of Mr. Prakash Ramada. So I'm happy to announce that our Prime Minister had taken a decision to invite 2 members of opposition. We had also invited Ms. Ramona Ramdial to accompany us on this trip, because we think it is important as a government to take Trinidad and Tobago to different and higher levels. So we had extended an invitation to these 2 members of Parliament from the opposition. Mr. Prakash Ramada graciously has accepted the invitation, and we look forward to him accompanying us on this trip and visit. We have received regrets from Ms. Ramona Ramdial, and it doesn't prevent us or stop us from what it is we're about to achieve, and we look forward to engaging with our Jamaican counterparts in some very fruitful and productive discussions over the next few days, starting on Sunday to next week, Thursday. So, having said that, that will be the official delegation from Trinidad and Tobago on this state visit to Jamaica. I'd like now to invite the members of the media to ask us some brief questions, because we expect the Prime Minister to join us very briefly. So if you can address your questions to either the Honourable Attorney General, the Minister of Finance, or myself.
Kamal Georges from CNC3. I'll start with the Minister of Finance on the issue of the medicine. You said the matter should be resolved quickly, but considering the situation facing the hospitals, I'm wondering, can you specify what very quickly means? How soon will we see?
Well, what I can reiterate is I short-circuited the usual process. Under normal circumstances, NIBDEC would have to await a letter from the Ministry of Health, who in turn would have to wait for confirmation of the Cabinet decision. And in addition to that, there would also have to be confirmation of availability of funds and releases and so on. So I short-circuited all of that, being the person who approves all of these things anyway, as they come to me in a normal way. And I asked the General Manager of NIBDEC to order the items immediately, which he did. He confirmed to me that the order was placed within 10 minutes of me asking them to do so, on the assurance that they would get the money. And I was in a position to give that assurance. The orders will now...
Just excuse me.
The orders will now be placed. In terms of speed, I would assume there's some items they can get within a short period of time. There will be other items there where there will be some lead time. So I will ask NIBDEC, now that you have brought this question up, to give me some idea of how long it will take to procure the items. But there are some items they can get immediately, virtually immediately. Some will take some time.
Okay, members of the media, as you all have seen, the Honourable Prime Minister has joined us. So at this stage, the Honourable Prime Minister will address the members of the media from...
Good afternoon, members of the media. It wasn't my intention to be part of today's post-cabinet meeting. So I just came in to deal with one matter, and I hope that you will allow me to just treat with one matter which I think is necessary to be addressed. I trust that the ministers who were here would have dealt with the matters of cabinet. The matter I wish to deal with is not a matter of cabinet, and that's why I wasn't really supposed to be a part of the cabinet communication. But I think it is sufficiently important for me as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to respond today to a very disturbing headline in today's Guardian. This is still a free country, and people are free to express their views. It's one of the attributes of our free democratic society. So I'm taking no issue with any person's view on their assessment of any situation. However, the headline in today's Guardian is more than just an expression of view. It's an expression of view which can have the effect of misrepresenting the country's history and the facts of certain situations with respect to public administration, public policy, racial solidarity, and the peace and stability of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's against that background that as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and more so as leader of the People's National Movement, this party in our 60th year, we, and I say we, meaning all the population, must take note of the accuracy of the opinion expressed as fact that Patrick Manning was racist. I do not appoint myself as defender of Patrick Manning, but as defender of the public record, I think I'm duty-bound to respond to that banner headline in The Guardian that Patrick Manning, long-standing Prime Minister and Member of Parliament, Trinidad and Tobago, was in fact a racist. A lot of our young people would have read that statement today, and when they would have read the evidence to support that statement, it is quite possible that many of them, not just young people, but many adults, might have read it and digest it as fact. And if they do, it is quite possible that their behavior and relationship with the rest of our society could be somehow influenced, not for the better. And that is why I'm here today. There are 6 or 7 items of evidence which are supposed to support this statement that Patrick Manning was racist. And the major one is that he closed down the sugar industry with the intention of and the effect of bringing hardship to the Indian population of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I take objection to that statement because that statement is not supported by fact. I was the Minister of Agriculture in the Patrick Manning government. And I go back a bit further. Sugar in Trinidad and Tobago was a private sector business, and it engaged a large section of the East Indian population, and the industries as owned by the private sector, a number of small companies were going out of business in the private sector. Had nothing to do with the race. It had to do with the economics of the industry. But because of the tremendous negative effect that that would have had on Trinidad and Tobago and the people involved, in 1975, a PNM government bought up all these small estates and created a state company called Caroni 1975 Limited. And what that action did, it allowed Trinidad and Tobago, which had a sugar industry that was dying, to survive for another 20 years with significant billions of dollars of state-injected funding, state support. I don't know how, and I've never seen that action on the part of a PNM government being described as a racist salvation or a racist action, because it has nothing to do with race. It was economics. And it was the communities involved, whoever they were, that the government of the day, which happened to be a PNM government, had intervened in this way and created that extension of life for the sugar industry of Central and South Trinidad. That industry was surviving even with government's injection of the billions of dollars along the years, was surviving mainly on the fact that the export component of the sugar as produced by Caroni Limited went to two markets. The larger portion went to Europe and the smaller portion went to the United States. And in both of these markets, there were special prices being offered to countries like us, where higher than market prices and prices way beyond the production costs allowed us to produce that sugar, sell it in these preferential terms, and continue the industry. Then came the discussion on the global stage of the changing of terms of trade for agricultural products as part of the coming of the WTO. It took a number of years, but there were indications and warnings and preparations that a time will come when these preferential prices will no longer be available. And Trinidad and Tobago was required to put its house in order so as to be able to survive when the WTO and the preferential arrangements became reality, and the loss of those arrangements. I was the Minister of Agriculture from 1991 to 1995. And in responding to this development, which came after a number of attempts by other governments and other ministers, there was the Dukaran plan, the Frank Rampersad plan, and so on and so on. And under the Patrick Manning government, that was the Manning's first term of office as Prime Minister, we set about to get an agreement for the survival of the sugar industry in that difficult environment, called the Tripartite Agreement, where the government, labor, and the company came together and hammered out this tripartite agreement to try and get the industry to survive in those turbulent waters. One of the signatories to that agreement was Basdio Pandey, who was opposition leader and head of the All Trinidad Sugar Workers Union. After that, there was some issue involving some back pay, and whereas the tripartite was meant to look at a future for sugar in a different environment, the back pay became the issue for Mr. Pandey, and he withdrew his signature from the tripartite and refused to cooperate with it. And of course, the company limped along as it was, absorbing approximately between $500 million and $1 billion a year, and so on and so on. And while we did improve the pension for workers, you got pay increases and so on and so on, the main thing was the markets were not there. So the European Union moved out preferential treatment, and we had a date by which that was going to happen. And then came the US. So the preferential treatment in preferential markets died. That meant, even with the support from the Treasury in Trinidad and Tobago, with the loss of the markets, the sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago had come to a point of no return. It's against that background that in 2002, a decision was taken to close the sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago. It didn't only happen in Trinidad and Tobago. St. Kitts had a sugar industry. They had to shut it down. Barbados shut down most of theirs, and a portion of it, which was always private sector, in the private sector, they had no state sugar industry. It was the private sector, funded by a bank. And on many seasons, there were difficulty in funding their industry, and the crop was dependent on whether the bank would fund it or not. And they still limp along with a bit of sugar in Barbados. But most of the industry shut down. And elsewhere across the world, that's what happened. So for somebody to get up today and say that the closing of Carney 1975 Limited was a racial act to suffer Indian people is close to sedition, meant to create racial discord and to disturb the peaceful fabric of Trinidad and Tobago. And as the minister involved, as I just described, and working on the Prime Minister Patrick Manning, that allegation cannot be supported by the facts of the day. I won't go into the details of what happened at the time of the closure, where in bringing about the closure, a number of matters were dealt with in a very generous way. The voluntary separation was enhanced. The pension was improved, and it cost the taxpayers over $2 billion of support for persons who were going to lose the industry. And even today, as I speak to you now, the last amount of money is still to come. The European Union money that was meant to come into the Treasury to replace the Treasury money that was used to bring about the closure and the soft landing, that money was being made and is being made to the sugar industry and to those same communities. So it is quite wrong and misleading for anybody to try to rewrite our country's history and to use that development as I described, which was purely in response to external changes and market negatives, and saw a humane government and a humane country responding to a challenge like that, and to bring that up today and to portray it as something which was some person's racist action is short of terms I would not like to use. So I put that on the record. The sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago enjoyed its origin after 1975 by a governmental action that intervened when the private sector was closing it down. That intervention gave us 20 more years, and the 20 best years of sugar, because that's when sugar workers really earned money and got proper attention in Trinidad and Tobago. Carney 1975 Limited. Before that, it was close to peonage and feudal systems taking place. So, it's still a free country if persons want to interpret it that way, but I simply put the facts on the record. The other fact was that Manning tried to arrest Chief Justice Sharma. I simply want to put on the record that the removal of a Chief Justice in Trinidad and Tobago involves the office of Prime Minister. Doesn't matter who's the Prime Minister. But if a Chief Justice has questions to answer, which brings about any consideration of removal, it involves the office of Prime Minister. And in the case of Chief Justice Sharma, the record will show that the allegation of Mr. Sharma's misconduct did not come from Prime Minister Manning. It came from the Director of Public Prosecution, Jeffrey Henderson, who indicated that Mr. Sharma had done matters or done things which were deemed to be unacceptable and which triggered action which could have led to his removal. Those are the undisputed facts. Secondly, Okasi Paul. Yes, Okasi Paul was put under house arrest. That was a decision taken by a government of which I was a part. Because, again, it's still a free country. There are other points of view. The point of view which I, and I presume Patrick Manning, my leader at the time, was that we were not going to allow Speaker Okasi Paul to remove the mandate of a PNM government which we earned in a general election. Okasi Paul, sitting in the seat of the Speaker in Trinidad and Tobago, took it upon herself to reduce the government's majority so that the government will fall. She started by suspending Ken Valley. And on the day when she suspended Ken Valley, she indicated openly that when the parliament resumed the next time, she was going to suspend me and Keith Sobian and Wendell Motley. You remember that? And we had to intervene to prevent the speaker from doing that. I know there are others who didn't like it, but I tell you, we took action as a government to protect ourselves from being suspended from the parliament by a speaker who had gone rogue. And that is the country's history. The historians will discuss that, and history will have been made at the time. The bottom line is, the fact of the matter is, there was a speaker who virtually walked out on the House, ran out of the chair, so as to prevent the government from properly adjourning the House, and send the threats which we got directly from her, that I will suspend you at the next sitting, simply to reduce the government's majority, so that an opposition motion could be carried to dissolve the parliament. So that I put for the record of those who were born after that time. Feroza Ramjohn, Patrick Manning acting as a racist with Feroza Ramjohn. What is the story? Feroza Ramjohn was a public servant who the same Patrick Manning, who is supposed to be a racist, approved her relocation from Port of Spain to London on promotion. He wasn't a racist when he did that. He was a prime minister approving the promotion of a citizen. After that was done, the security services brought to Mr. Manning's attention that in investigating a matter involving corruption with respect to Trinidad and Tobago's passports, that officer seems to have been implicated. Mr. Manning, in response to that information from the security services, withdrew the approval for Mrs. Ramjohn to go to London. Mrs. Ramjohn felt aggrieved, and she, quite correctly, as she was entitled to, she went to court on the matter. And she pleaded in the court that action was taken against her to her detriment without her being given the opportunity to be heard. The court agreed with her, and the court ruled that Mr. Manning should have given her the opportunity to be heard. The court never adjudicated on the matter of the passports themselves and the allegation made by the Security Council, by the Security Department. It said that Mr. Manning acted improperly when he acted on the security services advice without giving her the opportunity to be heard. Louis Leasing and I-95.5. Again, I was in the cabinet. I think we were a new government, if my memory serves me right. We were a new government. And a cabinet note came because maybe the very morning of that cabinet, I-95 was a broadcasting station, broadcasting on a license which was held by Hilson Phillips of Tobago. Hope you remember our country's history. A license was granted to Hilson Phillips in Tobago to run a station in Tobago. That was his intention. But instead, I think he leased the license to the principals at I-95, and I-95 came into being broadcasting on a license that somebody else had. They had business problems as business partners or whatever they were. And Hilson Phillips withdrew his license from 95.5. And this new broadcasting station, which had introduced talk radio to Trinidad and Tobago, suddenly had to shut it down, today for tomorrow. They came to the government and asked for a license of their own. The relevant minister, Minister Hedges Burrow at the time, he brought the note to the cabinet indicating what I just told you, that the license was withdrawn and they need a license to continue. And they being a broadcasting station, in business, people are going to lose their jobs and so on and so on. The cabinet was asked to approve a license. I was there. Minister Imbert was there. Minister Robinson Regis was there. Minister Imbert asked the question, And we all accepted the question. Is this the only license that is in the pipeline? We did not agree at the moment. We asked the minister to check and see if there were other licenses that were there waiting to be approved. The minister reported back to the cabinet that there were no other licenses that were approvable on that day, at that time. On that basis, the cabinet approved the license for I-95.5, and that station has been broadcasting ever since. Immediately after that was made known, there was a complaint from Mr. Satmaraj that he had an application inside from the Mahasabha and that the Mahasabha was being denied the license and so on. The cabinet was a little disturbed because we had asked whether there were other licenses in the pipeline, and we were told that there were none. And when we investigated the matter, this is what we found out. There was, in fact, an application where Mr. Maharaj was an interested party. I'm not sure if it's on behalf of the Mahasabha or himself. However, Dr. Seth at the time was tasked in finding out why that was not approved. Turned out the application was only partially completed. And there were certain pertinent bits of information that were required to complete the application. And therefore, the public servants who spoke to Minister Bureau saying that there was not another license to be approved, they would have taken the position that because the application was incomplete, it was not a license that could have been approved. And that's why they said no to us. Dr. Seth, on Mr. Manning's instruction in my presence, was told to contact Mr. Maharaj and have him fill out the application form, and once it is filled out, the cabinet will consider favorable outcome. I was told that that was done under the hand of Dr. Seth, and there was a refusal to go along that route. And the next thing we knew, in the face of allegations of racism, this matter ended up in the Privy Council, and the Londoners agreed that the license should be granted, and we stayed damned for the rest of our lives that we didn't give the Mahasabha a license because we're racial. That is the story of the Mahasabha license. The cabinet acted in the way I just described. I was there, I was part of that cabinet. Then, of course, we're hearing another well, I don't even want to go down this road. Divine Echoes is a Christian band to play Christian music. My knowledge of Divine Echoes is a dance band, playing music that people dance to recreate the big band of the era of golden local music of the Clarence Curvan and John Buddy Williams and the Clarence and the Pete the Flute and Frankie Francis. The whole idea was to recreate that kind of music so that people can get to dancing, whether you agree or not. It wasn't a Christian band playing Christian music, it's a dance band playing back in times for Christian and whoever else, Muslim, Hindu, to dance. That was the whole idea. Today is being used as proof of racism in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the report of the Ryan Laguerre effort is proof that Patrick Manning is racist, and of course, by extension, the PNM. And what did the report say? In today's paper, it says that Indian people were not being promoted in the public service to the higher levels. That statement is a bold statement. On its own is not the full story of our history. And it also doesn't tell you that Mr. Kenneth Lala was the chairman of the Public Service Commission longer than anybody else. And unless, of course, he was discriminating against Indians, I don't know what is the basis for using that particular statement to support today's headline. I simply want to say, in conclusion, that this is the confirmation that there is free speech in this country. But this kind of free speech, in trying to rewrite our history, and rewriting it in a way to paint us as a people who have done less than we could have to maintain peace, stability, and brotherly love in Trinidad and Tobago is not good for this country. And I reject Mr. Maraj's attempt to defend what he thinks he's defending. But I will defend this country's record, especially when I was a part of that record. Thank you very much.
Okay, members of the media, you've just heard from the Honorable Prime Minister. We've been going for the past hour. Yeah, so I think we'll allow 2 questions, please, because I really have to wrap up, and we've been going for the past hour and it's after 3 o'clock. Yeah, I have a meeting.
Okay, I just wanted to ask the Minister of Finance, when you, with respect to the issue of the pharmaceuticals, you spoke about an overhang which lingered from the last administration. Could you possibly give us an idea what's the figure that quantified that overhang, and how you have any idea how that was allowed to persist this long and frustrate this problem?
Well, in the first place, I'm simply standing in for the Minister of Health because of his unavoidable absence. I can't tell you why the UNC didn't pay their bills, because that's the second part of your question. I can't answer that. They should have paid them. I don't know why they didn't pay them. I can tell you the amount was over $50 million. To give you a precise figure to tell it whether it's 55 or 60 or 70, I would not wish to do that today, but I know it's more than $50 million. That was the amount due to NIBDEC for pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical items that were ordered and delivered prior to the September 2015 general election. Okay, but why they didn't pay the bills? Ask them.
Okay, and the last question.
Yeah,
Ria.
This is on the ruling of the court. Now, my memory tells me that the Minister of National Security had in fact requested of the Police Service Commission to trigger the process of searching for a candidate. So in the light of the fact that the court has removed the minister from the process, how could you then say that nothing in what you have done has been affected? To me, the process has been sort of tainted, so to speak.
Thank you. If I could clarify, the language of the order that the minister, it says this. Literally, the order said, the Commission, on the request of the Minister of National Security, shall, in accordance with Section 20A1C of the Central Tenders Board Act, contract an appropriate local firm. It was always and still is the Commission. Who invokes the Commission to do it was specifically stated in Parliament, where the Minister gives the proverbial knock on the door. It was not to the exclusion of the Commission doing it itself. The mischief in the last order, which resulted in 4 or 5 years of no action, $8 or $9 million of expenses, and Penn State University doing nothing, was that the DPA, the Director of Personnel Administration, had to trigger the process. So what we have now is a confirmation that the Commission still has its full autonomy, still actions out its process, and that the language that the minister can trigger was always side by side with the Commission doing it itself. In the current process, which is afoot right now, the Commission has done its process. They are engaged in finding a local firm to do this process, and that remains undisturbed. So it must be born in the specific context of what we said. I noted the tweets and headlines going out, UNC one matter. The UNC asked for the entire order to be struck out. They did not get that. They said that everything was ultra-vires. They said that they wanted to have all of the prescriptive terms returned. They said you needed to put all of that. They got none of that. What the judge did in modifying the order is only must be viewed in the context of what they asked for. The UNC asked for the whole order to go, and that's not what happened. The process that the DPA is no longer the trigger, that the commission itself can do this, that you simplify the process. You don't have to use a foreign firm. You can use a local firm. You're not bound by the strictures of the Central Tenders Board Act. All of that is intact, which is why we are quite pleased to say that the process is now afoot. We're looking at the judgment in its totality, but it is entirely incorrect to say, quote unquote, the UNC has achieved some victory. That's an erroneous headline, and I would caution members of the media to read what was asked in the context of what was said by the UNC, in the context of what was delivered by the court, as against what we said the process is. The process needed to be simplified, and that has withstood the scrutiny of the court.
Thank you.
The commission is on board with that?
If the commission is on board with that, the commission had lawyers attend for it. They were led by Mr. Martineau and Ms. Laura Passard. The commission appeared as an intervener in the matter, and the commission is an entirely autonomous entity in respect of which we have no control other than enabling their resources to be in place to do what they need to do. We have been consistent in our approach towards the autonomy of the Police Service Commission. We stand by the principle that they are autonomous. What we wanted was to simplify the process, and that has withstood the scrutiny of the court.
Thank you. One last question.
A question to the Finance Minister. Just wondering, Minister, what would be done now to ensure that the Health Ministry doesn't find itself in the future facing the situation it had faced with outstanding bills and then the inability to acquire pharmaceuticals for the public health service?
We will make sure they have adequate funding.
And
I don't mind giving you details. I don't mind giving details. The fact is that the health sector has expenses, and we need to provide funds at particular times to deal with particular problems. This problem came up, so we found a way to deal with it. We will always find ways and means to deal with funding for the health sector because it's so important.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll have to wrap up now. Thanks again for coming, and do enjoy the rest of your day.